Recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
Got it.
And Dana, you're on twice.
Oh,
Not twice.
You're logged in twice. We see
Oh,
you, but then
okay.
I only, oh, you are twice. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, the dogs are probably on the second one.
Let us
Well-
pray. It's already 4 minutes into
Computer
it.
is wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, technology can be only good if it's done properly.
yeah.
All right.
Shall
Next
we?
week,
Go ahead.
next week, the Torah Study Group is taking a field trip. We're visiting Bernie Feinberg in Denver.
Yay!
And there's a group flight that leaves at 4:30 in the morning. And Delta's going to give us a special breakfast on the plane, which
Nice.
is a stale roll. And
Is that like
Very
pizza?
Then we're gonna have a
Coffee.
little van that's gonna drive us to his residence and we're
Yeah.
all gonna
Correct.
depend on him.
And we're going to pick him up and whisk him away from his center and take him to the Denver Zoo and the Denver Symphony. And then we're going up in the mountains of Colorado, and we're going to
Nice.
mountain climb.
Can we
Good.
skip the zoo? I've been there a number of times.
Sorry, Bernie, this is a surprise. You have to do what we tell you.
Yeah.
They have a good museum.
But we're gonna have you ride on a giraffe and get a picture of you riding the giraffe.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna climb up one of those mountains in Colorado, and we're gonna take tents and sleep on the mountain.
I don't
Sure.
wanna sleep on that.
Rabbi,
Yes, Pam.
can I say something about last Friday night service? Dave and I were on vacation, so we watched it on Zoom and Minya and everybody. It was just incredible. The stories that people told. I was just, anyway, I was awed.
It was impressive. Very, very
Yes.
impressive.
Yeah, it was just such a great idea to hear people's stories of what their parents went through and thank you for doing that. That was a great service.
Yes.
That was initiated by Sarah Jane Feldman, and we were able to put together that whole thing in 24 hours, 36 hours. So it worked out really well.
Yeah.
And I think it, aside from the Holocaust remembrances, it shows that the congregation likes to have the opportunity to express deeply felt personal narratives that relate to their lives and that connect to spirituality.
Yes, it was such a great idea.
Great idea.
And so I'd like to do something similar but different, maybe in late May, where we'd have 3 or 4 people talking about something short and personal, not on the Holocaust, but something that, is personal and connects to spirituality and Judaism and their lives in a meaningful way. Marcia Gratz said that she would do one.
You're in the headlights.
Yeah. He's just making sure you're listening.
Shall we do the blessing, Rabbi?
Sure. Are everybody all set for the blessing?
Yeah.
We join together. Baruch atah Adonai
Elohim,
melech haolam asher
Shano mitzvah Yitzilanu Lasso Divrei Torah.
blessed are you, Adonai our God,
Ruler of the
Lord
world.
of the world.
who has sanctified
Sanctify us with your commandments and commanded us to obey the words of Torah.
Amen.
I believe we are on page 140.
140.
There you are, yes. Page 140, Perek Aleph, the Jewish festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And welcome to everybody here. Good morning, Evelyn. Good morning, Riva. Good morning, Lori,
Good
Pam,
morning.
Marcia, Shirley, Bernie, Minya, and Steve. Shirley, you may be able to turn on your camera now because things should have stabilized. So give it a try. Give it a try. Okay, so the Jewish festivals are a tremendous mystery to us. Where did they come from? How did they develop? There's relatively very little written about it, and there's a few older books that are very, very intriguing. But clearly, the origins of these festivals is not what they are now. In the ancient world, before 2000 something, 2,500 years ago, there you are. Surely we see you. 2,500 years ago, roughly. Oh, Shirley, you're there twice, which doesn't seem to be a problem at the moment, but if it becomes a problem, I think we have audio on one volume and visual on another. Anyway, 2,500 years ago or 3,000 years ago, these three pilgrimage festivals were probably more important than what we call the high holy days. And then at some point, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur became, the holidays. Were they connected, the three holidays? Probably not. Were they originally agricultural and then there was or were there two holidays like Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot? Each of them were two holidays, at least. One that was agricultural in focus, one that was religious. And at some point, somebody decided to merge them together. So this is all kind of vague, but tremendous differences from today. So that's sort of a little bit of the background here. Harvey Fields goes more into the meaning and specifically into the meaning of each of these three festivals, which is an interesting thing as well. And so this is one of the longer essays he's got in his entire 3-volume collection, and one of the more serious ones, perhaps. Okay, those are just some very few introductory comments. I'll open it up for some initial broad philosophical comments, beginning with Pam or Marcia or Lori. Or Riva.
These are the three holidays. These are the three holidays that we say Yiska or have Yiska for. Those are the only three, actually, I think.
No, Yom Kippur.
And Yom Kippur.
Oh, Yom Kippur, that's right. And then what's, not Sukkot, but Shavuos and Pesach, yeah.
So, but yes, these are, and that's because they're, three of the most important holidays. And and I know that Jonathan Werbel, who's our incoming president, would like to restore at least a short service in the morning for each of the Yisker services.
That's what I wanted to ask you if we were doing that, because I remember in my previous congregation, we got together to do it. Even I remember it being on a weekday even that we met. And
Right.
We used to have Yiska services. I remember Rabbi Moss having them. We would remember it.
But we haven't done that in the last couple of years. And partly it's because of COVID and so forth. But now the question is, do we want to restore them? And that would be up to the Religious Practices Committee, but I would be quite happy. Marcia.
I went to one the one I went to in California. I found it even more meaningful for some reason than the one at Yom Kippur, which is surrounded by all the Yom Kippur surround, the glory of that holiday, if nothing else, but taking the Yiska prayer and just doing it separately for its own reason of being Yisker, to remember. And it was much more moving, I thought, to separate it out.
And I told Jonathan that even if there's only one or two people, I'm happy to do the service, provided we do it in a appropriately sized venue. So to do it in the sanctuary with two people feels lonely.
We did it in our congregation. The sanctuary had movable chairs. So basically they took everything out and they just made a circle and everybody sat together.
Right. So in our case, we could do it in the chapel, which is
Well, yeah, the small sanctuary. That would make sense.
which we call the chapel. Okay, other comments about this essay or about this parsha or anything that's broad, philosophical, and relatively straightforward?
There's one thing I do not understand. According to what I've read, the custom of Pesach evolved long after the Common Era started, and yet let's just say Christian custom assumes, or do we attribute the fact that Jesus was at the Seder? That was his Last Supper. So the Seder already existed. When did the Seder actually come into being?
Well, so there's two very interesting questions there. Lily has joined us temporarily, right, Lily? She heard Seder and she
She's
knows
looking
Seder.
for matzah. She's looking for matzah, yeah.
She loves matzah, actually. All Passover, she and I sat and ate matzah. So recent, previous scholarship, going back 20 years, was saying that Jesus was at a Last Supper was probably a Passover Seder. Recent scholarship has cast doubt on that. And because the timeline doesn't really line up perfectly. And so I would say that between you and me and Marcia, let's turn off her volume so she can't hear us. Probably Jesus's Last Supper was not a Passover Seder. But many scholars did say that. In terms of when did the Passover Seder start, the Passover Seder as we know it started after the destruction of the Second Temple. There's a whole tractate in the Talmud Pesachim, which you could take 2 years to go through, but particularly the 10th chapter is very relevant, is really about the Passover, the creation of the Passover Seder. And you see in the 10th chapter of Pesachim, the rabbis sit down and they say, let's put together a Passover Seder ceremony. Who wants to write this? What do we want to edit there? What should we put here? How do we symbolize things from the temple so that we remember? So that is post 70. So now, does that mean they didn't have something before that? I guess they did, but it wasn't most of the stuff we know today. And of course, what you've seen if you come to our Passover Seder the last year or two, we use Jubilon, which is very creative. So we've eliminated a significant part of the traditional Passover Seder, which is seen as a little too technical, and we've substituted more snappy stuff. And, mostly we've gotten positive responses. What one person emailed me to say they thought too much of the traditional stuff was removed. So different people have different opinions. Okay, other comments, Lorraine?
Hi, sorry I'm late.
No, it's okay. You look very nice.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to say anything now? Minya? Riva?
Yeah, I
Riva and then Minya.
sometimes I really like what Harvey Fields has to say in his opening and closing statements. And I particularly like the very opening sentence in this parak, and that is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel observed that Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time rather than space. And so I thought that was a very important thing to say. And for those of you, probably you all know, Rabbi Abraham Joshua was a very important rabbi in 20th century who marched with Martin Luther King.
Correct. And this is a very famous insight from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, that Judaism is a religion of time rather than space, of time rather than space. So whereas other religions might build big cathedrals, we were more interested in sanctifying time. Of course, much of that was, practical, that we didn't have the ability to build big cathedrals. So, but I still think it carries a profound meaning, and these three pilgrimage festivals emphasize this concept of time. Okay, thank you, Riva. Minya.
I was just wondering where Simchas Torah fit into these different groups of categories.
So as I said, these holidays are kind of amalgams of different holidays that came from different places, and they were merged together. And then you merged other holidays onto those holidays. So Simchat Torah is merged onto the end of Sukkot.
Thank you.
And why? What's the difference between Simchat Torah and Shavuot? There's a lot of similarities. Okay, so Shavuot is the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Simchat Torah is the starting of the reading of the Torah over again, but it's very similar. So, but it's a chance to dance around, so we like Simchat Torah. It's the very end of Sukkot. So that counts as Sukkot, kinda, sort of, not really. All right, I have to be careful. I don't want Marcia to hear too much.
I'm gonna feel so guilty here.
Riva.
Yeah, just a quickie. I don't know if this was true for others of you, but I recall on Simchas Torah in Shul, all the children marched, particularly the children marched around. And I received from my grandmother a little Torah that I have to this day.
We used to
Correct.
And it was a wonderful inclusion of kids.
And so the Reform movement and other movements as well have tried to use these holidays effectively. And so Sukkot, and sometimes the beginning of Sukkot was used for consecration, it was called. So for example, in Georgia, every year we had consecration on, I believe it was Sukkot, and all the kids starting religious school would come, and we would present them with something, and there would be a little ceremony. Likewise, Shavuot, which was and Sukkot is obviously in September, October, so it was the beginning of the school year roughly. Shavuot, which came in May, would be when we had confirmation, which was at the end of the year. And over the years, Reform movement had trouble getting people to come to Shavuot, which was still observed on the right day. And so by having confirmation on that day, then you turned what was going to be a low turnout into a very high turnout, which was great. So Shavuot in Georgia was wonderful because even if you only had 3 or 4 kids being confirmed, confirmation was a really big deal. So everybody would come with their families and friends. So 3 or 4 kids, each kid would bring 15, 20 people. And then the congregation would come to see it. So you'd have 150 people. And if you didn't do that, you might have whatever, 15. Marcia.
Did do that when we had the school being active. We did have it. I remember the kids running around with their little Torahs, and it was celebrated here too.
Yes,
I
and
know that we have that many kids at this point in the congregation.
we've got one kid, and Ben, and he's our star. And I'm doing my best to try to bring in some more. I thought I had 2 more, and they disappeared on me.
Oh.
And but I'd very much like to get a few more kids. It would be very high priority, but I don't know what the problem is. Okay, other comments? Okay, let's start page 140. Who'd like to read?
Nobody.
I'll read if you want me.
Okay, thank you, Marcia.
Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel observed that Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. Unlike the space-minded man to whom time is unvaried, homogeneous, to whom all hours are alike, the Bible senses a diversified character of time. Judaism teaches us to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of a year. And
that's from his classic book, The Sabbath, published in 1951. So that's 75 years ago almost. And it's a short book. It's not a hard book. It's very poetic. It doesn't talk about the details of Shabbat observance. It talks about the philosophy. And the point here being that there's a space-oriented man, that time is unvaried, meaning that time on a Tuesday, time on a Thursday, time on a Saturday, it's all the same, right? Time is just hours in the day. And for most of us, to be honest, probably we have fallen into that, right? And he's saying the Jewish philosophy is that different times are different, are qualitatively different. And so time on a Friday is different from time on a Thursday because you're preparing for Shabbat. Time on a Friday night and a Saturday are different from time on a Friday morning because you're celebrating Shabbat rather than preparing for it. So the whole week has several different types of time, and that makes life more meaningful. It makes the hours more meaningful because each hour in each day is different. So, and we kind of know this, right? If you sleep late and you don't wake up till 2 in the afternoon, you could do from 2 to 4 what you would do from 8 to 10, but it's not the same, right? Different times are different. And if if you're supposed to meet somebody a certain time, you can reschedule it, but it's not the same. And Heschel is saying that we can do things in our mind to make time special. Different kinds of times are different, and that can really enrich our meaning of life. Comments? Riva?
Yeah, I love that idea. I still celebrate Shabbos and take it easy that day and focus on family and kind of that sort of thing. I think it's a real paradigm shift between the focus in our culture now, which is much more emphasis on stuff, on things and places. And so this is a real, an alternative view of how we are in the world.
So what about shutting off all our electronics from Friday afternoon to Saturday night?
That's not part of my program.
That would really make it different.
I'm sure it's effective. I think it's a very individual thing how if one chooses to experience Shabbos, I think there are a lot of different ways to do it, and it's very individual for all of us. But, in some way making it a different day, and a day less focused on materialistic things or that sort of thing, or going certain places. It's a way of living your life on Shabbos.
I mean, I like the idea of like not reading emails on Shabbat. Like just, you could keep your phone for playing music or videos, but no looking at any emails. But I haven't been able to actually implement that in practice. I'll pick up the phone and on Friday night after services, and what do? I immediately check email. And this was right within an hour or less after services. Is this bad? I think it is, and it's not necessary.
Yeah.
But I do it, and I'm a victim of, or I'm falling into the habits of everybody else, and Evelyn.
Rabbi, isn't this why people who enjoy nature will take a weekend off, go into the woods? There are no electronics, there is no distraction, and in a sense, they are creating their own Shabbat by divesting themselves of all of the extraneous attention-getting aspects of our culture. And so this is one way to do it, whether you go to shul and sit there all day and pray, or whether you go into the woods. But to me, this is another way of handling time, as you say, and restoring ourselves. And I think this is the essence of vacation, to be perfectly honest. I don't think vacation should be, if it's Tuesday, it must be Amsterdam because we're on a tour. I mean, my feelings are that that's not necessarily a vacation. A vacation.
Right. It's a travel tour. There's two types of things. There's the travel tour where you're going to experience things, and then there's the vacation where you're going to sit on the beach and not do anything. So they're quite different, to get away from things and just sit in a fancy hotel on the beach is one type. That's a vacation. When you go if it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium, that's a cultural tour. Then you need a vacation to recover from your travel.
From your travels, yes.
We could go. We can go hiking in Colorado up to the mountains with no cell phones, and hope that we don't get lost. And they'll be all over the news. This group of temple hikers from Arizona are lost somewhere in the mountains in Colorado, and they all left their cell phones in their car, so there's no way to reach them. Yes, Bernie.
It really doesn't matter whether you take your cell phone or not. They probably wouldn't work anyway in the mountains.
Yeah. Take a compass. That's much more reliable.
Well, the one of the spy agencies, I'm sure, could track us no matter how little reception there is.
Compass is on my cell phone. So there you go.
Lori, comments?
So I was just thinking about something I had read where it talks about the Talmud attempting to take the whole of human life into account. Nothing is trivial, that everything's regulated and sanctified by religion. So it only makes sense that since the Hebrew Bible is the stuff out of which Judaism is created, it only makes sense if it gives us so much. In Judaism, it gives us the Talmud, it gives us this, our life isn't trivial. It gives us everything that we do should be regulated, should be sanctified. It would only make sense as the people that we should look at these beautiful festivals that God gives us and to give them their season of examination, right? To really look into, to really celebrate them, to really give good character, good analysis of their meaning, and to celebrate them, to set them apart as holy, to sanctify them themselves. So I agree with Heschel that everything is, Jewish time is different, and these seasons are important, and we should take it into account because Judaism takes into account so much for us.
Okay, good. Any other comments? Lorraine, Cy, Bernie, let's get somebody from the more historical wing of our group. Okay. Okay, so who's going to read? Marcia,
Okay.
right?
Parsha Emor contains the calendar of sacred celebrations through which Jews have sanctified time, setting aside days for uplifting, enjoying, and sharing the meanings of human existence. Chapter 23 of Leviticus describes the weekly Sabbath, Rosh Hashanah, known within the Torah as the first day of the 7th month and the day of blowing of the horn, and Yom Kippur, as well as the 3 festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot.
Okay, so what holiday does not have the name that we ascribe to it in the Torah?
Simchas Torah? Is that it?
No. What holiday
New
is
Year.
not
Oh, Rosh
called?
Hashanah, I guess.
Right,
Rosh
thank
Hashanah.
you.
Rosh
And what
Hashanah.
does Rosh Hashanah mean?
You said
Head of the year.
Right, head of the year, new year. And why doesn't it call it that? Because in the Torah, it wasn't the new year. It was the first day of the 7th month. It wasn't even close. It was halfway through the year. So for the Torah to call it a new year would be completely ridiculous because it wasn't. The new year started in Nisan right before Passover. So somehow the calendar flipped, and what was the 7th month became the 1st month. But it was too late to renumber them because the Torah already renumbered them. So our 1st month is now actually our 7th month. But you see how these holidays evolved, and the rabbis or whoever had to go with the flow and do the best they could with the text that they had. Comments, Evelyn, Lori, Riva, Pam?
I don't know what to say. I saw that and was puzzled by it, and then realized that yes, Rosh Hashanah had been redesignated as the beginning of the year when actually it was not, and it was obviously late spring, early summer when the harvest came in that I think people preferred that. Isn't that the beginning of the new year? And so it's interesting how over the ages that holidays have been transmuted from one thing into something else because society changes, and as society changes, these holidays also do so to accommodate the current culture. And so what was written and was common then is not necessarily so today. And if the Jews survive another 1,000 years, which I certainly hope they do, I'm sure again the holidays will have changed because the culture will have changed as well.
Marcia, thank you, Evelyn.
So we celebrate a new year in January, but the Jewish religion doesn't seem to make a whole deal out of it. So it seems to be a sociological thing with us. It's just that our culture nowadays celebrates the new year. Doesn't seem
Well,
to
the new year in January doesn't have any Jewish roots.
No, but the Jewish New Year, when is the Nisan equivalent then?
The 1st of Nisan.
which is, I mean, equivalently to the Gregorian calendar. So what
It would
month?
be like April 1st.
All right, but so nothing happens then. So we don't make, the Jews don't make an issue out of it, is what I'm saying.
Well,
So-
we do have a Rosh Chodesh thing where at the beginning of
Oh.
every month, we're supposed to make a big deal
Yeah,
about
but
that.
that's every month,
All right.
right? So it's a societal thing. It's just the Jews say, big deal. It's the first month of the year, you know?
Well, I think also we've now put the first month of the year as Rosh Hashanah, so we make a big deal of that. And so that's become our new year. But we actually, the Talmud talks about 4 New Years, and you're supposed to make a big deal about all 4. So there are 4 New Years.
What are they?
With the new religious practice committee, we're going to introduce all these new holidays that'll be obligatory for everybody in the temple. And so you'll learn about them because we'll be schlepping you to the temple Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. I'm joking.
Okay.
Seriously. Riva.
Yeah, I love the idea that the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, and that you recognize, you know, when things are happening by looking up rather than looking down. You know, we look at how many stars are out, and is it a full moon, and those sorts of things. And I'm reminded of a children's book that I used to read to my son all the time. It was called Look Up, Little Hippo. And I love that idea of, you know, getting your eyes off of, you know, what's immediately in front of you and sort of perhaps beneath you, and look up. And so I think that whole concept, I sort of enjoy it. You know, and so many Jews, the Orthodox Jews, they go outside and see where the moon is and see where the stars are, when, you know, for the various time periods.
I Look Up, Little Hippo. That's a great title. I mean,
It was a little hippo that was lost, you know. It's a wonderful little kid's story. It's sort of look up and look around you, and don't keep looking, you know, sort of at the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it follows the lunar calendar. You know, you look up.
Now, I don't agree with your comment that the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. I think, I guess you got that from Harvey. And I think that it is a combination lunar and solar. So it's not a completely lunar calendar. But he does say it's a lunar calendar. So, you know, but it's very complicated. There's big books, like 600 pages on the Jewish calendar and how it works. And you have to have a lot of interest in that to read through some of these things. But for our purposes, it's sort of a mixed situation. Other comments?
In my commentary in my Pentateuch, it says
Which Pentateuch is this?
Hertz.
Okay, and I'm using here Stone. So everybody should have some sort of a Torah in front of them. There's also the commentaries from the Jewish Publication Society. So you have a lot of choices that, you know, at some point we could spend an hour going through all of them, but Hertz is the original one. Yeah, sorry, Lori.
It's my favorite. I love it. I don't even know how I would survive without it. Anyhow, it says in pre-exilic times, the new moon was celebrated as a minor festival. So we probably did celebrate somewhat of a new year, you know, in the month of Nisan. It was in this pre-exilic time that he's speaking of. But when he talks about, or whoever's speaking in this particular passage, as the 7th day in the week was a holy day, so the 7th month was the holy month in the year. And each new moon was made an occasion for additional offerings. So anyhow, I just thought it was interesting to point that out. So there was a time when we celebrated each month as a small festival.
Okay. Let's read on. Marcia.
Hey, both Pesach and Sukkot begin on the evening of the 14th day of the month, at the time of the full moon, and both festivals are 7 days in length. According to the Torah, the first and last days of these festivals are observed like the Sabbath, from sundown to sundown with no work. Shavuos is also a no work day, but it is celebrated on the 50th day after the beginning of Pesach.
And of course, the idea of sanctifying time is much more extreme when you follow the Orthodox regulations. So when you have certain days that are considered Yom Tov, and all the halachas relating to not doing any of the 30 whatever forbidden categories of work, malachot, then you have to walk to shul, you have to preheat your food, things like that. You can't use lights, can't use your car. Then, you really notice the time that is a Yom Tov from the time that is not. And it really becomes almost impossible to quote unquote assimilate. Although still possible, I remember being on a bus to visit my grandfather's brother in Red Bank, New Jersey. And I sat next to a guy who was an Orthodox Jew, married to a non-Jewish woman. And so he observed all the rules, on Shabbat, he didn't drive, didn't use electricity, but he was still married to a non-Jewish woman. So it was quite an interesting conversation. So I know I said, what about would your wife convert? And he said, she's very interested in Judaism, but she doesn't want to follow all the rules. I said, so have her convert reform. He said, I thought of that, but that would make things more complicated in my community, because then she would be considered part in, part out. And so, so there's no such thing as no guarantees against assimilation and intermarriage and these sorts of things. But certainly if you're following all these rules about Shabbat and holidays, it makes it a lot harder to assimilate because you can't do anything. You have to follow the rules strictly.
Wasn't that the idea, Rabbi? Wasn't that the idea, to prevent them from assimilating? And so that was the only way to keep the group intact, was to prevent them from being influenced on the outside world. And for the Orthodox, mainly it does work.
And that was clearly one of the purposes. Depending on the era and the place, it was more important or less important. I think for the Dead Sea Scroll group, for example, they weren't so worried about that. They practiced their practices for mystical reasons that were quite beyond that, but they didn't think about assimilation as a problem. But now they says that Pesach and Sukkot are both 7-day festivals, right? What is also around, and sometimes those go into 8 days if you're Orthodox and you observe 2 days at each end because you're in the diaspora. What else is a holiday that's not mentioned here that's around that length?
Hanukkah.
Right, thank you. And do you know where I'm going with this?
No.
Let's say it softly so Marcia doesn't hear.
I'm listening.
Anybody?
Steve.
It's a minor holiday
So what's the connection? Why did I just ask that question?
to get more people into the service.
Bernie?
There's no work days.
I'm thinking of something more specific. Where am I suggesting that Hanukkah came from?
Christmas.
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 No.
Hanukkah is an antidote to Christmas. When I was growing up, Hanukkah was an insignificant holiday. It was mentioned merely in passing as a military victory in part of our history. But as the influence, and we became more assimilated, and the influence
Crazy.
of Christmas, and the influence of Christmas was affecting the Jews. How many times did the kids want, quote, a Hanukkah bush? I mean, and basically they felt left out. Think of all the wonderful lights and everything else. And so Hanukkah became that sort of a holiday. And
Where did it come from, Evelyn? Where did it come from?
Where did what? Hanukkah?
Yes.
As far as I remember, it was considered a military victory.
But it's got,
Where did it come from?
it's got to do with the
temple.
lights and
Temple being
bringing light.
destruction of the temple.
Lily is sitting here in shock. Lily said, I thought your people
Rebuilding
were
of the
much.
temple.
Yeah, say it again, Shirley.
Rebuilding of the
Building.
temple.
Yeah, what you guys are saying is all right, but I'm thinking of something else. Where did the 7 or 8 days of Hanukkah come from?
The oil burning for
When they restored the temple. I mean, they lit the oil, and then so the legend became.
You're giving me all the standard explanations.
Yeah,
I'm arguing what really I think happened. I was there. I saw it in my own eyes. I'm arguing that, okay, the Jews or a certain group of Jews were fighting the Syrians, right? We call them Syrian Greeks, but they were Syrians, and they were Greek culturally, but they were Syrians, and they drove them out, and they reestablished the temple the way that Evelyn and Shirley and Lori and a few of the others here said. And then they celebrated Hanukkah because they couldn't celebrate Sukkot because they were in the middle of a war. So they celebrated Sukkot late. So I'm arguing that the original celebration of Hanukkah, the first year, was not Hanukkah. It had nothing to do with the lights, and it had nothing to do with the military victory. It was that we couldn't celebrate Sukkot because we were in the middle of a war. Now the war is over. We're going to celebrate Sukkot. Then the following year, people said, let's do it again, because, you know, let's light candles and let's remember we like the latkes, and we want to remember the military victory. And then it was about the military victory. Then fast forward 50 or 75 years, the rabbis and the Hasmoneans have a big fight. The rabbis do not like the Hasmoneans, who won the war. So then they we don't want to make the Maccabees the big heroes. We're going to transfer the meaning of the holiday from the military victory to the miracle of the lights. So I'm saying there's three stages in the early development of Hanukkah. It was originally a late Sukkot, then it became a commemoration of the military victory, then it became a celebration of the 8 nights of the lights. It's just my theory. I'm not an expert on this. If anyone speaks to Marcia Gratz, just don't mention this, please. Steve.
Okay, I thought it was the rabbis, though, that initiated the celebration of Hanukkah to bring more people in to service, but also to identify the fact that they were, that they did win. So it was a rabbi's invention rather than an actual ceremony.
That's the way that the historiography might portray it. I'm theorizing that that was not really the case. That it was the Maccabees who celebrated the Sukkot late, and then it was the people who wanted to remember the military victory, and only in the third stage it was the rabbis who wanted to shift the meaning of the holiday. But as I said, this is just my theory, and I could be and probably am very wrong, but that's what came into my head. In any case, we'll move on. Let's do the box.
It's a good theory.
Okay.
Calendar box.
Yeah, the calendar box. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on calendar issues. As I said, it's very complicated, but let's just read through it.
All right. The Jewish calendar consists of 12 months with a little more than 29 and a half days in each month. It is a lunar calendar with each month beginning at the time of a new moon. An entire year consists of about 354 and a third days, 11 days less than the 365 and a quarter days of the solar calendar year. As a result, every few years, an extra month is added to the Jewish calendar to make a leap year and to keep accurate the adjustment of the months to the season. This extra month is known as Adar Shani or Adar Tu. The Jewish calendar begins in the spring. The first month of the year is Nisan.
Okay.
15 to 22nd is Pesach. And the second is Yom HaShoah. Iyar, 5th is Yom HaAtzmaut. The 18th, Lag BaOmer. Sivan, 6th to 7th is Shavuot. And Tammuz, the 17th, fast day. Av, 9th is a fast day. Elul, that doesn't have anything. Tishri, the 1st of Tishri is Rosh Hashanah. The 3rd is a fast day. The 10th, Yom Kippur. 15th to 21st, Sukkot. 22nd, Shemini Atzeret. Shesvan, nothing. Kislev, 25th to Tevet 2nd is Hanukkah. And then Tevet. Shavat, 15th, Tu B'Shavat. Adar, 13th is a fast day, and the 14th, Purim. Just as Jewish commentators have seriously questioned the motives of biblical personalities and the reasons for the Torah's laws and commandments, they have also focused upon the meanings and evolution of the Jewish holy days. What makes them holy? How are they unique? Why do they contribute to our human quest for purpose and fulfillment? Okay, do we want to go on?
No, stop there. Comments?
Why did you not agree that the calendar was a lunar calendar?
I don't think it's a pure lunar calendar. I think that it's a hybrid, I think it's called.
Hybrid.
But you'd have to really investigate exactly how the Jewish calendar works. Of course, as you know, before they could do these calculations, they had to estimate, and you probably heard the story that they would light fires on different mountains so they'd know whether the new month came on a certain day or a day later. And that was the origin of the practice in the diaspora, where they couldn't get adequate notification of doing 2 days because you knew it would fall either this day or that day. And so by celebrating, for example, Rosh Hashanah on 2 days, you could be sure that you were celebrating at least the right day. Also in the fighting in the temple, which led to the Dead Sea Scroll group leaving and going to Qumran, there was a big fight that went on for many years over a variety of issues, but one of the issues was calendar. And so there was different Kohanim who felt that the calendar, they had different calculations, and therefore they felt the other group was not observing certain holidays on the right day. And that was, of course, of tremendous concern. And eventually one group led by the teacher of righteousness, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, took a group of followers and they just left the temple and went to the Dead Sea, where they, built a monastic community, supposedly, and waited for God to help them return to the temple and be accepted as the right approach. Meanwhile, the other group of Kohanim stayed there and they did continue doing what they had thought they would do. And we know a fair amount about what these fights were about, but they can get quite technical.
There was
But
there's a great read if anybody's ever interested about the calendar. It's called The Battle for the Sabbath. That was during when Hertz was, I believe, chief rabbi of the British Empire. They wanted to change the calendar to like an 8-day week, and he had to go battle to maintain the regular calendar because it was going to cause so much upset in the world, and certainly for us as Jews. But anyway, it's a great book.
That's a book?
The Battle for the Sabbath at Geneva. It's part of his collection of writings, but I think you can get it if you want to go to like Abe's Books. They have a pamphlet of it. It's just a short section in his collection of writings, and it was an incredible read. I think it's called The Battle for the Sabbath at Geneva.
Okay.
I have it though, Rabbi, if you ever want to borrow it. But that would mean I'd have to actually come and see you in person to bring it to you.
You keep
All right, well, that's
Which is not out of the question. It's not out of the question for sure.
Lori, we're not convinced you're a real person. You could be an artificial intelligence generated figure on the computer screen. Okay, so now we're up to the first of the three Passover. We're not going to get through all three, but we'll at least go as far as you want. If you prefer, maybe we should start with Shavuot, which is coming up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so, because it's so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're only going to do one holiday, and since Shavuot is the next one in the three, let's do that. So return to 142, right column, probing the meaning of Shavuot. Any new reader? Minya, are you interested? Okay.
Goes good.
Probing the meaning of Shavuot. Just as rituals of Pesach changed through the centuries, so did the celebration of the festival of Shavuot. What began as a harvest festival of rest and sacrifices on the 50th day after the first day of Pesach evolved through the centuries into season of the giving of our Torah. How and why did such a transformation take place? Within the Torah, Shavuot is also known as the harvest festival and as the day of the fresh fruits of the harvest. Shavuot means weeks and refers to the span of 7 weeks stretching from Pesach at the beginning of the barley harvest in the land of Israel to the beginning of the wheat harvest. For the ancients, the 50-day countdown was a journey from one harvest to the next.
Okay, stop there, Minya. We have 2 holidays already. Chag HaKatzir, which is the harvest festival, and Yom HaBikurim, the day of the first fruits. So you already have 2 separate agricultural holidays that, again, I'm just speculating on what could happen or could have happened, that these 2 holidays were possibly, don't let Marcia hear this, separate, and that at some point they just decided to merge them together and call it all Shavuot. But they both revolve around different aspects of agriculture. Remember, there may have been different groups that did different crops or were, had different schedules for different reasons. And so, as there was greater unity, they wanted to celebrate it all together. Also, Shavuot means weeks, and as Harvey says here, they were counting the number of weeks from the second day of Passover to Shavuot, which is 49 days, I think. Okay. Minyan.
On the 50th day, the Israelites celebrated by bringing 2 loaves of bread, 7 yearling lambs, 1 bull, and 2 rams with their meal offerings and libations to the sanctuary. These, along with 1 he-goat as a sin offering and 2 yearling lambs as a sacrifice of well-being, were presented to the priests. The festival was observed as a Sabbath and as a day of thanksgiving for a bountiful harvest. All forms of work were prohibited. The Mishnah contains a description of how offerings were made at the Jewish sanctuary. When the Israelite entered, he would stand before a priest and declare, "My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, but an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. God brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil that you, O Lord, have given me."
Okay, and this is the ritual. It's a very famous declaration. It's very controversial how to translate it. Anachia Oved Avi could mean my father. This is the translation that I was always familiar with. My father was a wandering Aramean. In other words, we're all saying that our spiritual ancestors were wandering Arameans, but the rabbis the Talmud actually translated as in a completely different way, which we won't get into right now, that totally changes the meaning of it. In any case, these offerings, according to the Mishnah, were brought on Shavuot, and so you would bring your offering of grain or an animal or whatever, and you would then stand before a Kohen and you would make this declaration. Of course, I believe that would only be men, but we won't mention that fact right now. Pam.
What is a sin offering?
Well, there's different types of offerings. There's like 5 in the beginning of the book of Leviticus. There's 5 different types described. One is a chatat, and that was offered because you did something wrong and you want to expiate it. So there's different types of offerings. This is a holiday offering, which is a different type of sacrifice. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. That was easy. Other comments or questions? Lorraine?
Yeah, my question is a little bit on a personal level.
That's
Rabbi,
good.
okay. I want to know about your background, the type of home you lived in. Was it a religious home? Did you observe all the holidays? What made you? We all sent our kids to the ritual of Hebrew school, not all, but most of us, Hebrew school, very often confirmation class. But very few of them either practice it in their own homes now that they're grown, or have even stayed within the religion in their marriage partner. And I'm wondering what kind of home you came from that you have such a knowledge and an interest in it. If it's
I
not
guess,
just-
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm in an earlier generation. I'm born in late 1960. So I was born a little bit earlier, but I think my parents were probably typical American Jews for that time. We did belong to one or two synagogues. We belonged to at least one synagogue, and for a while we belonged to two. But they weren't super involved. But in those days in New York, you had to send your kid to a private school. I think it was just an accident of fate, kinda. And so they figured if they're going to pay private school tuition, they might as well send me to a Jewish school. And so there were only two Jewish schools at the time, Ramaz and Manhattan Day. So they picked Ramaz because it was less strict. Both were under Orthodox auspices. They didn't have Reform or conservative day schools in those times. Much later, they started a conservative one. But the school was mostly Zionist rather than Orthodox. So I didn't get much of a sense of orthodoxy there, really. But they did a lot of Hebrew, and it was half-day Jewish studies. And so I went to a Jewish nursery school somewhere else, and then I went kindergarten through 6th grade at Ramaz. So that really is what differentiated me from many other people. Then every year in grammar school, a lot of people like me who came from Reform households were being kind of pushed out. I don't know exactly the politics and where they got new kids from, but every year there'd be more new kids would come in, and they were Orthodox or Israeli. And people like myself were being slowly pushed out. And I don't understand exactly. So somewhere around the 3rd grade, the principal said to my parents, if you want to keep your son in school, you have to send him to Hebrew-speaking camp. Mossad, it was called. So my mother checked into Mossad, and it had a very bad reputation. They had 3 camps, Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, and eventually all 3 closed down because they were not good camps. So parents said all sorts of terrible things about them. So my mother said to the principal, no, these are not good camps. Of course, the point was that I would learn more Hebrew, and if you wanted me to stay, so I don't think my parents really understood what it meant to be committed to this kind of a school. Obviously, they did not. But they sent me there anyway. And so eventually it came to a head, and the principal said either he goes or to camp there, or you got to take him out. But I survived through lower school graduation, grade 6, which I was very proud of. I was one of the last of my group. And I remember in 5th grade, maybe, I had a friend, Gal Lipkin, an Israeli. His father was like a ship captain for an Israeli shipping line. And I was over his house, and before we could play, we had to do our homework. And, I was very conscientious, but I remember looking at the Hebrew grammar book, and I thought, there's no way I can understand it. Like, there's no point in even asking Gal to explain it to me. So he said, I can do your homework for you. I said, fine. And for me to say that meant I just knew that there was no point in the world for even trying. It was so far above my level. It was basically Israeli textbook. And that was in 5th grade, but I had a very nice Hebrew teacher in 5th grade, so I did pretty well. But then maybe that was 6th grade. 6th grade was a very vicious Israeli woman named Miss Mandelbrot. And then years later, I was in Israel, and I was studying a year abroad, and they offered a home hospitality dinner for Rosh Hashanah. So me and this other guy, I think his name was Charles or Chuck, and I think he was from Boston University, and I think he became a conservative rabbi, but I don't remember his real name. We went to this one household, and this guy was an executive at the Jewish National Fund. And in the course of dinner, it comes out his last name was Mandelbrot, and this vicious teacher I had in 6th grade was his sister.
Oh, God.
And I said, to my eternal shame, I said, "Oh, she was a wonderful teacher, and you must be proud to have her as your sister." And ever since then, I've kicked myself. She was so vicious. I had a chance to retaliate by telling her brother the truth. But he was hosting me on Rosh Hashanah as a gesture of friendliness. And it, at the time, and probably now as well, now if I was in that situation, I would just keep my mouth shut. I wouldn't say anything positive or negative. But, afterwards, I thought I really should. I had a chance to get my revenge. She was so vicious.
I think,
And,
I think,
I
Lorraine,
guess,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
it was in Israeli culture. It's a different thing. And she didn't understand, American Jews and, the things we knew and didn't know. And I don't know,
Your next book
but
should be an autobiography.
yeah.
I think, Lorraine,
Well,
I think what you were asking, Lorraine, was
No real names used.
where did his familiarity come with all these festivals that you don't regularly celebrate, maybe in a Reform platform? But I think being in an Orthodox or an Israeli environment, in a Hebrew school sort of fashion, you would be exposed to those too, as pretty commonplace, and conservative as well. So I definitely think, but certainly as part of becoming a rabbi, I'm sure, Rabbi, you had to know the holidays. So I think that he would have been exposed to the festivals on different times of his life and different learning situations.
So yeah, so that's, and then I went to Yeshiva University as a Reformed Jew, which, and they again had like 4 or 5 hours a day of Jewish studies. And and then I had my 3 days in Yeshiva in Israel that I previously told you about. But, I did other stuff as well. So by the time I got to HUC, I probably was pretty atypical for an American rabbinical student of that generation, and this generation even more so. So I feel very, I identify less and less with other Reform rabbis as time goes along. The previous generation of Reform rabbis were much more similar to me, but most of them have passed away, and I'm like, why am I still alive? Like, but culturally, I had more in common with the Reform rabbis 30 years older than me than I do with 30 years younger than me.
So are you saying that the newer generation of Reform rabbis are more observant?
They come from much less backgrounds.
Oh, okay.
Like you can take Aria, our student rabbi over the summer, she was raised by a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, neither of whom practiced any religion. She decided, I forget exactly, but, well after her 18th birthday, that she wanted to be Jewish, period. Whereas I never decided that, from 4 years of age, I was like, I was in a Jewish religious schooling, not ultra Orthodox or anything, but, it was pretty intense and pretty, it was 4 or 5 hours a day. And, it was, there was no question that I was Jewish.
More of the Reform rabbis now are women.
Right. And that's another thing, although, people don't laugh, but I said, well, with my name Dana, I could do the sex change thing and I wouldn't have to change my name. But all right, you're laughing, but
It's
I've
funny
told that.
it's
I've
funny
tried to
that-
tell that.
I'm sorry,
Say again?
it's funny that you say that, because I have your book that you edited, The Meaning of Judaism. What is it called? I don't know. But anyway, I thought you were a woman when I saw your name, but then I Googled you, so.
Yeah, well, you see. So that answers your question a little bit, Lorraine, but yeah, I
Thank
mean,
you.
if you raise your kids just with Hebrew school where they go 1 hour a week, like when we had our religious school and it was 2 hours every Sunday, mostly arts and crafts. It was, you're just trying to give the kids a good feeling about it, but you're not really teaching them, and it doesn't really work, but there was no alternative, so you do the best you can. But I remember when I was in Australia, I was asked to go up to Great Barrier Reef for a week where there was some Jews, but they never had a Jewish community. And what happened was more and more people moved up there for various reasons. And this one Jewish couple that ran this Aboriginal theater started inviting people one year for Passover, and they had 2, and then the following year they had 6, and the following year they had 15. And then they realized they had a little community. So they asked me to come up for a week. And I met with about a dozen teenagers, none of whom had ever gone to religious school. And they were so enthusiastic because they'd not gotten any education. And I began to realize that the typical religious school program we have seems to do more damage than good. So, but that's American Judaism. And, it's been, when I was little, I thought, how does this make any sense? This is going to totally, destroy everything. And a lot of the experts, quote unquote, said, no, it'll work fine. And so I thought, well, who am I to question them? So in all my books, I was underneath it all quite pessimistic, but I tried to spin it optimistic. Partly because the experts said, everything will be fine, and partly because it just didn't seem people wanted to read books that were negative, unless you were really going to emphasize that and say the doom of Judaism is your title. So I tried to spin it optimistic, but I wasn't really. And now it's clear to me that was true. That there was an article last week that religious school attendances in Jewish schools, afternoon schools, is down 50% over a 15-year period. Riva.
Yeah, I have an article in front of me. It was written in the New York Times, April 24th, by Jessica Gross, who's an opinion writer. And she says, in the forthcoming book, Beyond Doubt, The Secularization of Society, the sociologists so-and-so and so-and-so describe a change in the built environment of St. Louis that is emblematic of the ebb of organized religion observance in America. What was once a Gothic-style beauty of Catholic Church built in the 19th century by German immigrants has turned into a skateboard park. Anyway, she's this author, Jessica Gross, and I'll send you a copy of it and you can share it with whoever you want. There was a survey done of around 1,000 American adults, and the secularization and the pace of it has rapidly increased, which we've all experienced in so many of our own households. So anyway, there's some data connected to this, and she's continuing to write a series of articles. I think that'll be published in the New York Times. Happy to share it with you. It's not just the Jews, it's the secularization of all religions. And
Right.
particularly in the United States, they're all dropping out. I think she gave something about the percentage of, oh, here it is. In the United States, the authors tell us somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 churches close down every year, either to be repurposed as apartments, laundries, laser tag arenas, or skate parks, or simply demolished. So the number of religious institutions in the US is really fading. So not what you hear, but there's some data behind some of this.
Yes, and none of that's. I've been visiting different ministers, and their churches are all suffering, and all of them mentioned that another church in their denomination in Glendale or wherever closed recently, and they got some, so, even with the new members from the closed church, their membership is still down, so yeah, we're not just us, as Riva points out.
All right, now the question is, why is this happening? What started the trend and why is it continuing? This disassociation with religious affiliation, which 50 years ago was very, very strong. I mean, Catholicism, Protestantism, even with the Jews belonging, this became their community. What has happened to our society? Do we look upon the government now as big brother, that they are going to do for us? Are they going to give us what the churches or religious institutions previously did? What's happening in our society? And we can see some of the trends, but maybe there are trends that we're not aware of that are affecting religion as a whole, shall we say?
Yes,
I'm
and
sorry.
we did a number of programs on America's Four Gods and the future of American religion. We can do more. So there's a lot of reasons for that, Evelyn, which we could go into, but I think some of them. But as Riva points out, they're much, much broader than our temple, and they're much broader than even American Reform Judaism. Yes, Riva.
Yeah, I just have a closing sentence from that article. The author writes, I do wonder about what may be lost by not having a community connected by belief, but I'm not quite sure what that is, or if replacing it is possible or even desirable. So I thought that was a really interesting final comment, and that is, what are we losing by all of these institutions disappearing? There's some things related to religion that is very precious to many of us.
Right. Well, yeah, well, what can I say? Other final comments, Pam, Shirley, Sai?
I'll share something.
Minya, who was?
Lori.
I'll share something. So as we're coming to the end of Deuteronomy, Moses is not entering the promised land. We've been on this journey. We finally arrived. Moses endeavors to strengthen their faith in a moral government of the world. And in spite of the conditions, and I'm reading this from something that I've written down, it says, in spite of the conditions which might well make men despair, the world was one in a divine purpose. And Israel, to whom this divine purpose had been revealed, could endure through this dark night of the world. It alone had hope, and men who can hope can endure.
Very beautiful.
So we should definitely keep the faith, right? We should have hope, that we're gonna go into this promised land, we're gonna be in this promised land, and now we're going to, repopulate our Jewish communities, and we should never give up faith.
That's true, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Okay, let's do the blessing, and then if anyone has any other announcements, we can go there. Together, Baruch atah
Adonai.
Eloheinu melech haolam,
Asher natan lanu Torah hayeh
Atochenu, Baruch
Adonai Eloheinu Torah.
Blessed is the Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us the teaching of truth, planting within us eternal life. Amen. Okay, a couple things. First of all, Friday night is new member Shabbat. It's also a free pizza party, and I think we have a fairly significant crowd going to be attending. Afterward, there will be a cake and other desserts. And then Sunday is the Brotherhood sponsored brunch for Mother's Day, family Mother's Day brunch. And the food has already been, most of the food has already been purchased, is at the temple. So no sneaking in the walk-in.
On Friday nights, do you do a full service, a full Kabbalat Shabbat, essentially, Rabbi?
Well, I have an hour and 15 minutes, so it's certainly a significant service. But, even that time only allows certain things.
Okay, so it's a 15-minute service.
An hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, hour and 15. Oh, okay, that's
Or an
fine.
hour and a half.
That's about what we do. That's about what we
Well,
Yeah.
we try to keep it so that includes a short Torah service, very short Torah service. It includes a short sermonette. It includes a very short Kabbalat Shabbat, basically Lecha Dodi. It includes the Shema and the Baruch Hu and prayers related to that. It includes an Amida, a short Aleinu. So it's not full, but we try to cover the highlights as best we can.
do. You do on Saturdays a full Saturday morning service ever?
We have once a month a guitar service in a house. Everybody saying goodbye. So bye-bye. And that is pretty impromptu.
We said goodbye to Minya because we saw she was leaving.
Yeah.
And that's the third Saturday of the month.
Okay.
And it's not in the summers, but that's Riva goes to that, and Marcia, have you been?
I have not.
Do you use the oh God,
And then there's a brunch afterwards.
which sitter do you use?
Form Sidur for both times, Mishkan Tefillah.
Okay, I'm familiar with that one. That's the one we use.
This one.
I've got a suitcase filled with Mishkan Tefillahs so that I roll back and forth like a medical rep.
That's funny.
Okay. And
Thank you for class.
All right, everyone.
everybody.
Lorraine, thank you for asking about my background. That was an interesting thing to talk
Oh,
about.
thank you for the
Yeah.
time you spent with us on that.
That was
All right.
great.
Recording
Interesting
stopped.
class.